Tells you what this does. It forms a commission, and the duty and purpose of this commission will be to bring information to cities and counties about other populations of their size and the socioeconomic statuses and all or of that population, and what the salary packages look like for their law enforcement. So do they? I've even heard testimony yesterday that one police chief was at a municipality so small that they had to get their own guns. Had to buy their own guns. You had to have your own gun to be hired. So so they'll look at all those things: bulletproof vests, health insurance, retirement, all that. So they'll look at the whole package. It's not just dealing with salaries alone. And if you'll notice in Section 1, I'll just kind of go through this as we're looking. On line 10, this is to attract, at the end there of line 10, to attract highly qualified individuals to professional careers in criminal justice disciplines and to retain well-qualified. So to attract and retain is really a real important part of what we're trying to do here, to give information to those who are making decisions in the counties and the municipalities, information to make informed decisions about their starting salaries and their salary packages. You also will notice on line 14, it says, "Is further the General Assembly, the intent of the General Assembly to establish appropriate baseline of compensation and benefits information." Now, if you look up the word baseline, here's what it says: a minimum or starting point used for comparison. So that's what that word baseline means right there. I've had some feedback on that. But I intentionally put that word baseline in there, and that's what the intent is, a starting point used for comparisons. And also, if you'll notice on line 17, it talks about, after the comma, and to combat turnover rates in law enforcement positions. So turnover is a huge expense to any company, and I look at municipalities and cities and counties as companies. In fact, the chair and I were together at a mayoral conference in January, and he sat beside me as I said that to the mayors there. I said, "Look, this is your business. We don't want to dictate to you how to run your business, but we do want to give them good information so they can make informed decisions when they're making those decisions." So if you'll go on through the bill, turn on page 2, and I'll show you what this commission's going to be, what it's going to look like, and who it's made up of. On line 28, it takes that matter. It says, "There is created the Local Law Enforcement Compensation Commission, which shall be composed of," number 1, "the Commissioner of Administrative Services," and I have some representatives here from Administrative Services today, so will y'all just raise your hand so they'll know who you are? Thank you. And then it goes on to say, one person who is the chief executive engaging in the management of a county or municipal law enforcement agency in the state is appointed. So the Georgia Association of Chiefs, and they're represented here today as well. A sheriff. Do we have a sheriff represented here today? Okay, I don't see any of them. I had asked everyone from this commission to have somebody represented here today.
Let me ask you.
Sure.
Before we get too far down this track.
Yeah.
If it's about all services, why do you name it the Law Enforcement Officer Compensation Commission instead of the local commission?
Is it if it's about all services?
Well, I mean, it isn't just about law enforcement, is it?
Yes.
Okay. I thought that we were going to be looking at collecting other data for other. We asked the question in my office of is there other local entities that could ask the same thing, or could it be expanded to say, well, we want it for tax commissioners, or we want it for this, or we want it for that?
Right, and what you asked me about in your office, you'll find the answer on line 46. It says that packages, well, let me back up to line 45. Packages provided for by other law enforcement agencies in this state and other states. That was we miscommunicated there, and I apologize for that, Mr. Chair.
That's fine.
Yeah. And so then you'll also have someone from the County Commissioners Association and Georgia Municipal Association. And then you'll have 2 appointed from the Senate and 2 appointed from the House, for a total of 9 on the commission. And so again, if you go on down to lines 42 through 54, you'll see on page 2, this is what they're going to be doing. The commission shall provide for an annual review of the salaries and benefits of local law enforcement. And again, remember, that's pretty wide range. You're probably just thinking health insurance and retirement and salaries, but again, it could include the purchase of equipment. It also includes the level of training that's required by certain. So you're looking at a good, and I use Wilcox County as my smallest county of the 9 that I serve. You know, I want my folks in Wilcox County to know that based on population, socioeconomic factors, and so forth, this is kind of where you start at, so they can compare where they are. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I shouldn't ask that question. Y'all have to ask questions back if it doesn't. So we go on, and so all these reports will be developed by this commission, and it will be shared with all these entities that are involved in the commission. And we had originally on line 55 on page 3 wanted the first report to be out on December 31st, 2017, and then published every 2 years thereafter. I will be amenable to changing that to 2018 because this is a lot to do in a short amount of time if we try to put it together by the end of this year, and I want it to be done right, and I think giving that extra year will help.
All right, Chairwoman Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Whoa.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking
Go ahead,
at this
Lieutenant
bill.
Governor.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. One, are the cities and counties governments in favor of this?
Again, they're here represented as well.
We're gonna ask some folks to speak up at the appropriate time, I think.
Okay.
But
Right.
what's your understanding of that
My
question?
understanding of that question is that they don't have a position, positive or negative. They're neutral on this,
Okay,
and
well-
they are willing to participate in the commission.
Okay, and it is only to gather facts. It's not dictating any terms or anything anybody has to do.
That's correct.
Okay.
Have you gotten a commitment from the sheriffs and the police chiefs that they won't use this information to hang us with on future legislation in terms of giving an unfunded mandate at the local level?
I believe that's what we call a loaded question.
Yes.
And to answer your question is we have not had that conversation.
Okay.
If I could follow up. A couple of things in here. One, we have a nice little resolution that we're going to be looking at in a few minutes, and it has to do with trying to keep the feds out of state business. And I want to make sure the state doesn't get into local business. If this is something that is dictated, we have so many large cities, and I come from a rural community. I just want to be careful of what we're getting into.
Sure.
It's fine to collect data and get information, and frankly, I have helped my local governments do that on occasion to find facts and get information pertaining to salaries and benefits and things for their employees.
Right.
But again, I want to make sure this is not something that we're overstepping our bounds in what we should be doing. Thank you.
That's a very good point, Ms. Taylor, Representative Taylor, and I don't see the commission as being that way. I know that this is my 3rd year here, and this has been a subject matter since I've been here, and I know it's been going on long before. So what I see the commission is being that conduit. There are a lot of ideas. That's another thing I'll point out. I've had a lot of ideas run across my desk about what can we do to handle this, and to the chairman's point, speaker's chairman's point is. I mean, you know, there are a lot of ideas, and people do want us. And as I said at the mayoral conference, I don't want to do that, and I don't think that's the will of the General Assembly. That's the pulse I've taken since I've been here. But I see this commission as being that conduit to bring all those ideas together, share that information with the municipalities and the counties so that, again, they can make informed decisions, and maybe ideas will come out of that so they can maybe solve their own problems.
All right. Representative Oliver, the board is lit up, so let's.
Okay.
Yeah, we might. I'm sorry.
That your mic might be broken. You might try.
How much is this going to cost, and who's going to pay for it?
Another reason that we want to put this off another year is to look at that. DOAS is committed to working with the commission on this. That's the only cost it'd be. The others would be there voluntarily. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Who's gonna staff it?
Who's going to staff the commission?
Yeah,
The 9
those-
people that I named earlier.
They're gonna do the work themselves, they're not gonna have a staff from DOAS or from Sheriff's Association?
Well, I think all of them can gather information and bring to the commission. So each organization may well do that, but they also may hire a consultant that will do that. And if there's a cost with that, then DOAS will have to come back to us next year. And this, by putting this out to next year, it gives time for them to put all that together, and let's see.
You don't really know how much it'll cost, but you think DOS will have to ask for the money?
No, I know we're putting money in DOAS now that will address some of this that's been put in from the Senate. I talked to Senate Research about this, our Senate Budget Office today, and they're committed to working with DOAS to make sure that whatever they need that they'll have. One figure that's been thrown out briefly was around $250,000.
This is not a recommendation as to compensation, am I correct? Is this commission going to recommend, by saying you want a baseline set, is that in the form of recommending that the starting salary be X?
No, it is to give them informed information so they can make an informed decision, and all they're going to say is based on your population, based on your socioeconomic situation, this is where salaries start at in the United States, or maybe in the southeastern region. The commission will decide that, but we do want to look outside of Georgia, not just inside Georgia.
This will be final, if I may, Mr.
Please.
Chairman.
Sure.
The question I was asking myself here is why doesn't the County Commission, Municipal Association, who, except for the authorities like Stone Mountain or World, who hire all these people, don't they already have this information? And we're basically state funding private entities to do this work at a estimated cost of $250,000.
And again, those numbers aren't that good right now, and I would suspect they would be less when it's all said and done. But your question is, don't they already have this information? My understanding is that there are some information out there. There is some information out there. There are some entities that have information, but I don't know that it's aggregated in the form that we're talking about.
Senator, and I'm trying to find a spirit of cooperation, and I've told
Sure.
the members vote the will of the committee, but we could ask the question of a fiscal note, and if we don't have, why does it have to be passed this year?
Why does it have to
Why
be?
didn't the
Sure.
Senate put an appropriation in for this amount?
Well, again, I apologize for not having the Senate Budget Office here with me. I thought I pulled everybody in. But my understanding is that there already is some funds that we're appropriating to DOAS that some of this would fall under. Now, to get to that final number, what's already being allocated, what may need to be allocated more, I don't have those numbers before you today. And Senate Budget Office could do a better job of explaining that.
Chairman Taylor, you're the next contestant.
Just one quick.
I'm sorry, Tom
Which
Taylor.
Okay. Sir, I guess a couple of my questions have already been answered, but one is, do you mandate participation by departments on this?
No, we ask all these people, and they volunteered to participate, and that's why they're all represented here, I guess, except the sheriffs at this point.
Okay.
But I do have a commitment from them to
And
participate.
that's a missing key component to me, because a lot of them started this, and they're not here.
Well, but I do have a commitment from them that they will participate. And they are excited about this commission, by the way.
And I guess, would it just be compensation packages, or like, I would say the level of, I'll give you an example, the level of activity. My city is, a nighttime population of 50,000. We have a daytime population of 140,000. So, it's kind of skewed a little bit with the police would look like it was, it's much larger during the daytime than it is at night. But I guess, would you also look at like calls for service, the number of things like that as well?
The cost of service?
Calls for service, like the
Calls for
the
service.
volume of just the volume
Volume
that
of
people are dealing
calls.
with,
Yeah.
on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's definitely something they could look at, and I think would want to look at as far as it's unique to each department.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author of the bill, Senator Kirk, I know you're a great Georgian and a fiscal conservative and support law enforcement like all of us do.
Thank you.
Ironically, Representative Oliver asked most of my questions, but I do have the same concern that others do. Would you be amenable to hitting the pause button on this until we do have a fiscal note? And the second part of my question would be, are you amiable to considering a sunset on this bill?
I would. I think a sunset might look like the first report being due. And again, I'm amenable to putting it off to 2018 for that first report. I think a sunset would look good if it said you receive that first report and then 5 reports thereafter. So it'd be about a 10-year, 11-year process. Yeah, I would be amenable to that.
Because further, Mr. Chairman,
Please.
Because if and just my personal opinion is that if it's a big fiscal note on it, I am going to go back to what Representative Oliver said, that every business organization that I've ever been affiliated with, we always had both state and national users groups, be it in the insurance industry, the banking industry, or the real estate industry, and every one of these large statewide organizations that I was members of had salary and peer review. What's the word I'm looking for? Surveys and information on. It was data driven about what's the average salary for bank tellers all the way up through CEOs, and similarly in the insurance industry, in the real estate industry as well. And it's sort of hard for me to believe that the Georgia Municipal Association doesn't have that data. The Georgia Police Chiefs doesn't. It seems to me that they could do their own surveys, and because that's really what's going to, we could get in the state involved, but they're going to come up with the same information these 3 groups could independently come up with and just meet by themselves and agree to share the information with one another.
Sure.
I should say, is that not true?
Well, I'll say this: it has not happened. So if that in fact is true, that has not happened, and therefore I think that's why this has been an ongoing issue for a number of years. And I don't, again, I see this commission as being the conduit to help maybe bring some. And look, in my businesses, I have had to say to people, at the end of the day, that's what this job pays, okay? And if you can't do it for this amount or whatever, this package, then that's what this job pays. You might want to go somewhere else. And that may be the answer that we come to on salaries. However, I'm not convinced today, because I haven't seen that coming together and them sharing the information and them working together on this. They haven't had a conduit to make that possible before. And so I think this commission could provide that, and again, they can explore the multiple ideas plus many more, I'm sure, that are out there that haven't come across my desk, but things I've heard. And so that's why I think this commission is very important at this time. Yes.
Representative Turner, I'm going to ask you real quick. These kind of questions weren't asked when y'all voted this in Senate.
Well, Mr. Chair, we just have a way of perfecting bills in the House, it appears.
All right, evidently. Representative Turner.
Thank you, Senator Kirk. I'm a big supporter of trying to figure out how do we treat our law enforcement officers fairly when it comes to compensation. So I support your concept. I do have some questions around the payment. Some of your members that are going to be pointed to this commission would be legislators. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? And where would their compensation come from in your mind?
No more than what we're paid now, I guess, a per diem.
So it would be a per diem, because that's not addressed in the compensation for the legislatures. And I think there's a constitutional question, and maybe Legislative Counsel can expound on that. And I guess I can maybe ask Leg Counsel. The DOAS would not be able to pay a legislator for this service. Is that right? Because being a part of the executive.
We don't normally have cross-branch payments. No. You normally be paid out of your branch.
So-
I've never been paid by any entity other than a per diem as a legislator that served on any study committee or so forth.
So if I'm missing it, am I missing it's not addressed in the language of your bill? Is that correct?
Well, I don't know that we address it in other bills where we have study committees appointed. Is that addressed in every study committee that's appointed?
If it's a study committee, which
Right.
is
This will be an
different- this would
ongoing commission, right.
So it's I don't believe it is addressed, and usually with a study committee, you do
And we're
have-
not anticipating them meeting monthly, or there'll be information will be gathered. We anticipate maybe a meeting a year or so.
Okay, I would just maybe at the appropriate time make an amendment regarding compensation.
All right, we'll see where that leads us.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Secretary Livingston.
Senator Kirk, just wanted to thank you for bringing the subject up. Having been in law enforcement and also having been a county commissioner in charge of public safety and having had to look at this very issue, I know that there is not a lot of data out there that you can draw on other than ancillary data or regional that you actually put together yourself. If it is out there, we've not been able to come up with it or could not come up with that. So having this information available, I think, would be very helpful to local governments when they look at having to deal with the issue of compensation for their law enforcement officers. I know we have some. There seems to be that there's some work that needs to be done, but in terms of principle, I think this is a very good resource, or would be a very good resource for us to have available.
Thank you.
Representative Collins, did you waive? Okay.
I just want to echo Representative Lumpson's comments. I spent almost 13 years in local government as a mayor of a small town, and this information wasn't out there. We had to dig for it. And you got GMA looking at it. You got the police associations looking at it, those kind of things. But again, I want to kind of follow up on Representative Williamson's comments as well.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that this group of individuals or entities could get together and do some of the work themselves and not put that burden on the taxpayer. And I'm certainly, agree that this information needs to be put together. But, I mean, we got everybody sitting out there in the audience. There's a lot of money that could be spent that doesn't necessarily have to be spent. I think we all agree the information is needed and the study is needed. But, I would say as legislators, let's encourage them to get together and do this and formulate that to the benefit of the state and not have the taxpayers on the hook for doing something that other groups of people can do. That's just
Thank you. Representative Oliver. Number 10, I think we're doing.
I'm really troubled by your paragraph B, 14 to 18. You say it's not a recommended compensation, but it could be interpreted that way. And I don't think that it would be.
What line are you referencing?
14 to 18, paragraph B.
Thank you.
I can argue that it could be interpreted that to establish an appropriate baseline of compensation and benefits to all local governments, it does one of two things. One, it says that this is our recommended compensation for you to hire somebody. Or two, it doesn't help DeKalb County for you to have a statewide thing, because I think it's fair to say that DeKalb County's compensation is going to be different than Ludwig.
Well,
so I'm trying to figure out really what is the product that you're going to generate for $250,000 that is going to be helpful to my city of Decatur, city of Chamblee, city of Doraville, and DeKalb County.
So I think if we went around the General Assembly, we would find that there are a lot of people that feel that, oh, my situation is unique, and that has merit, and you can make the case. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, it's law enforcement that's putting on the badge and going out and doing the job. And so I think we've already heard from a couple of your colleagues that were former mayor and former commissioner who said that when we looked at it, we didn't have this information. And I don't believe that information has been readily available to municipalities and counties. And so I think that I could also give you examples of some of the ideas that I've had run across my desk that one size does not fit all. I think we could all agree with that. And so that's why I think we need the commission to give this information. And again, the word baseline means to a minimum or starting point used for comparisons. So you start here. This, typically in DeKalb County or cities of its size, and DeKalb has its own county police force as well. So there's another dynamic that's into your situation. I think you need to look at those and what's happening around, because how many other cities in Georgia is going to compare to DeKalb County?
But if they do or don't compare, how is that useful? That's my point.
You look around at other states in other geographical, not geographical, but socioeconomic status, population, all those things, numbers of calls, these things has been talked about, and you say, this is pretty similar right here, and so this is a baseline. This is where you start.
Let me ask you on the similarities, and then we're going to hear from some members in the audience. There's an old, be careful what you ask for.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make sure that police departments or sheriff's departments, when they sit there and they go, well, okay, we've got a baseline. DeKalb doesn't compete with Willahoochee. But what we also realize is that your turnover rate is 300% greater than what anybody else is.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, is everybody going to be fine with that back home? Because then it's going to fall on the very people that says we need the information. Because I'm sure anytime you do that, they're all not going to be the same. What you're looking at is the positives of not being the same, which is we're underpaid or we're this, we're not, or our compensation isn't in line. But if you're actually keeping a baseline on retention, we're also going to find out just how bad your retention is, or how many people come and go compared to other similar situations, and that might not shine as positively.
Mr. Chair, that's not quite exact, because what they're going to be doing, that's right, of those that they poll, they're going to pull that information. They're not looking at where you're at. You do that. That's your job. That's your commissioner's job. That's your mayor's job. That's your.
So they only give us the information that they want to give us?
They give us the information that they gather. And that is that population, based on whatever the criteria they put, this is the typical turnover rate. So then you see where you fall against that.
I have a problem with us judging how fair it is if they're the one actually giving the information. If it's selective information, I would think that all of them should let us know every turnover in every police department or every sheriff's department for us to see. Because the argument's going to be made, part of the reason you have the turnover is because you're just not compensating enough, right? Isn't that what we're hearing now?
Well, that's part of what we're hearing now, but there's a lot of dynamics to why companies have turnover rate, and compensation is only a piece of that.
All right. I want to hear from some folks in the audience briefly, if we can. Anybody want to speak up? Yes, sir. Please come up here with the senator and identify yourself. Is a municipal association or ACCG going to speak at all? And if it's just for the purpose of being neutral, other than me wanting to ask the obvious question of why, then you don't have to speak at all.
I don't need to. We're neutral.
We're neutral. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Frank Vincent Rotundo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police. I have been so for the last 20-plus years. I'm also have been a law enforcement practitioner for many years, since 1969, and I know I look young, but I'm just mentioning that, okay? It's a long time. Now, I talked to the senator about this bill. There are parts of the bill that I expressed that I had some concerns about, but that part of the bill I'm going to be neutral on. The collecting of data.
You have concerns, so you're neutral.
But no, at part of the bill.
Yeah, but if you have concerns, why aren't you against those parts?
No, I'm not enough to be against it. So please allow me to go forward. There is a part of this bill, the collection of data, which I think is significant for people, if they wish, to use the data to look at their own departments. Now, I say that, but let me preface the whole thing by saying that I'm a firm believer in county government officials as well as city government officials to take care of their employees as they see fit. And there are so many variables associated with that. So I guess the part that concerned me the most was something that was already addressed. It was the baseline, the establishment of the word baseline. But the idea of gathering evidence information is really never bad. And in fact, I'm often called by law enforcement people to find out, how are other people paid, or what other kinds of compensation is given. And frankly, when that happens, I'll just show you how difficult it is. This is one department, and we did the evaluation of this department. This is a formal study of a police agency. And in the formal study of this, we did a salary compensation look, and we did those numbers from the database associated with the state. It's called the Department of Community Affairs.
Yes.
They have a database, and they have it in bracketed areas. But I also know that that database is not 100% true and accurate, because it's always a year later before that information gets to them, and then it gets published, and it takes 6 more months.
Do y'all promise to be true and accurate within a certain length of time?
He's referring to
Yeah.
DCA.
Yeah, I know, but I just, since they're looking to move it from DCA somewhere else, I need to get that definition of fair and accurate, because I don't want us to collect data and later go, oh, the data's flawed.
Well, I'll give you an example. When I've looked at some of these numbers before, and it might say a salary for a particular city is there. First of all, it lacks a lot of cities. The DCA information.
But this is voluntary, isn't it, Senator Kirk? You don't have to participate.
DCA's
I
material.
understand,
Right.
but in this bill, it's voluntary as well.
To participate in the gathering of the data, yes, but
Yes,
but
so you could make the same argument in
You can.
Mississippi City, right?
You absolutely can. And I said that that's a very valid argument. So I started with the premise of I agree that every county and every city should set their own standards. But it's always good to look at information that's available to help them set those standards. Now, to defer to one of your colleagues here who asked some information, it is difficult. Because when you look at that, you have to do a real staffing analysis. You have to determine what those departments really want, the quality of services, the amount of services given, but you also have to determine other factors on the quality of the police officers that you select. Some departments may require a 2-year degree. Some require enhanced educational standards. So you're going to see it all over. That's why realistically, the data, once it's even collected, has to be viewed at by each municipality or each county independently as it relates to their county and municipality. What I'm basically saying is that if the data is available, they could review it if they wish, and I think the data should be available. Whether it's worth $250,000 or $300,000, I don't know. All I know is that this city, for the one city to do this document, cost them, because we charge them, there's a lot of staff hours in this, $18,000. So this is one city, $18,000.
All right,
So
quickly, any questions for Mr. Rotundo?
Rotundo. It's a good name from the south.
It sounds New Jersey. Yeah, South New Jersey. Very good. All right, no questions. Anybody else? Thank you. Anybody else from the audience wish to speak? Department of Administrative Services.
Yes, sir. We're present. We're able to here to answer any questions.
Are y'all neutral as well?
We are.
All right. Any questions for Department of Administrative Services? All right, we got a couple questions lingering out there. Who we got there on? Williamson? No, Price, I'm sorry.
I think that was
Okay. You waive? Thank you. Williamson, Representative Williamson.
Mr. Chairman, given the appetite for figuring out the best solution in the path to this, and absent a fiscal note and the lack of participation by some of the other interested parties, notably the Sheriff's Association, I make a motion that we table this measure.
All right. We got a motion to second and a table. I want to do some discussion. First of all, Senator, what you thinking?
Well, I just will say this. Last year, and where did Back to Badge come from? You know, you guys passed the tag, and you'll have Senate Bill 160 in front of you. It's going to deal with assault and battery on public safety officers. And so there's been a lot that's gone into all of this. 9 officers were killed in the state of Georgia last year. Don't let me, I'm not deviating from what our subject matter is here. 4 of those officers were directly related to my district. 3 were killed in my district, and 1, his parents still live there. He served in my district for a number of years in the Chris County Sheriff's Department, transferred to Peach County, was killed with a fellow deputy there. So I've got a connection with what happened with law enforcement last year. In all that, it all started. My first death was in August, and I started thinking, what can we do? And there's we can keep passing laws and so this is really my spiel for Senate Bill 160 that you're going to hear later on, or some of you will. But part of the problem too that became quite apparent to me was the compensation of deputies. One of the guys had worked 16 years in the force. He made about $34,000 a year. He had a lot of kids he left behind. What I'm saying to you, committee, is this. This issue isn't going to go away next year, between now and next year. Putting off and delaying, looking at this is not gonna make the issue go away, and I hope you will reconsider your table.
All right, Senator, I'm gonna ask you as a colleague, a friend, someone's known each other for a long time. Do you want to vote of this committee today?
I do.
All right. I'm not going to recognize you for that purpose at this time then. I'll recognize for a motion of something else.
I hate to be put in this position, Senator, but absent we're not even getting the sheriffs here today. I've never met any, but nobody's, anyhow, I move that do not pass.
Okay. Let me reconsider there, Mr. Chairman.
Now see, you're gaming the committee, and that's I kind of had this feeling, and it has nothing to do with the text that I was getting, but I kind of had this feeling, and I thought a table was a kind motion. But I asked you want to vote? You said yes. What would you like?
Love a table.
You'd love a table. Okay. Now make sure we remind all of our senators how fairly treated they are in governmental affairs. All right. I'm butchering Robert's Rules of Order here real bad, aren't I? That's all right. Yeah, well, thank you. Representative Turner, you got a motion? No. Representative Williams.
Well, I'll make a motion to table once again.
Several seconds. All right, we got a motion to table and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for being here again.
Thank y'all.
No, thank you.
And I would encourage, probably not before the end of the session, but for the Department of Administrative Service, perhaps come talk to me. Thank you. I got to know as Secretary of Appropriations what that line item's going to be. Thank you. Cut that off. Let's just huddle a little bit when we get done with this one, if you don't mind, for members. Yeah. Thank you. Representative Spencer, House Resolution 610. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for indulging me in a hearing. I really appreciate the consideration. We went from a situation where state was trying to get into locals, and now we're sort of reversing the course here. Are we on? Yep, we're good? All right. I'll speak a little louder. Before you, I brought a substitute. The initial bill that you have, I added a different whereas clause, and I'll get to that as we get through this resolution. Essentially, we're working off of LC 288504S. Do you have that?
We're going to ask because we've got a couple committees, and that last one took a little longer, so please, thank you.
I'm going to be as brief as I can with this.
Thank you.
Essentially, in a nutshell, this resolution essentially is an objection to the federal government's declaration of state election systems as being considered as critical infrastructure as declared by President Obama's Secretary of Homeland Security, Mr. Johnson, and also upheld with our new Secretary of Homeland Security, Mr. Kelly, Secretary Kelly. They are essentially wanting to make sure that state election systems are considered as part of critical infrastructure under the U.S. Patriot Act. If it so, and if the chairman permits, I do have a list of critical infrastructure items for your review. But essentially, there are about 16 of them. This would make almost about a 17th critical infrastructure item. All this sort of boiled out of some of the election hacks, some may be substantiated, some maybe not, in some of the DNC situation that happened over the election year. And all that aside, I think what I'm trying to focus in this resolution is since this country, since our republic was founded, the election system of local and state officers that's the purview of the state. And in Article 1, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, it's pretty clear that charge that our framers set in place was given to the states. We often write local laws dealing with local legislation that deals with elections. That is our purview, that is our power. And in this designation by the federal government, this would give them a power grab that is unprecedented in any other, unless they amend the Constitution. We have amended our Constitution multiple times where the federal government had to step in and say, you have to, people can vote when they're 18. You can't discriminate based on race and sex and color. You can't discriminate based on gender and things like that. You can't do a poll tax. So outside of those exceptions, which were amended to the Constitution, this clause, Article 1, Section 4, is the clause that gives us that power. That gives us the separation of vertical powers that we know as federalism today. I feel that the designation of the critical infrastructure by the Department of Homeland Security, both under the Obama administration and under the Trump administration, puts that relationship in jeopardy, and that is one of the safeguards of liberty in the United States. That's what makes the United States a federal republic. And in a nutshell, Mr. Chairman and committee members, that's essentially what this bill does. I do have a guest here with me from the Secretary of State's office. But the resolution, if you will, I'll quickly go through that.
No, I'm sorry. You said this bill. I was just saying this.
I'm sorry. I'm in bill mode. But I do have Chief of Staff David Dove with the Secretary of State's office, who's been on the front lines of this issue. If you have more information you want to ask.
Real quick, questions of the author of the resolution? Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Spencer, we serve on the Senate or the House Science and Technology Committee. We heard testimony about this earlier, and I asked the question to Mr. Dove at the time, was this a port scan or was it actually a hacking attempt? And he described it as a port scan. Would you be amenable to changing the language on line 11 to say detected several port scans of its computer, so it would read that way? We would delete the lines unsuccessful attempts to penetrate, which it was not an unsuccessful attempt to penetrate. It actually was a port scan. Detect several port scans of its computer firewalls.
I don't think that change is harmful. However, I would try to inform this committee that the state of Georgia is not the only person that went through this port scan or whatever you want to call it, potential breach of the election systems. Idaho, Indiana, other states are making the same claims, and so I'm not so sure if that's a harmful or really, I'm not really sure, but if that's exactly what it is, then I have no issue with that. But my overarching point to the resolution is to make sure that we send a message to our congressional delegation that they need to amend the U.S. Patriot Act and make sure that critical infrastructure does not include election systems of the state governments.
The reason why I'm concerned is words have meaning and being accurate in what actually happened. And I believe the way that this story has been portrayed in the media casts doubt on our election system. It casts doubt on our federal government's intentions. And I think building and maintaining confidence in our elections is a paramount concern for government, and making sure that when we are talking about what actually happened, that we're using accurate terms to describe what happened, as opposed to something that could be used in a hyperbolic manner. That's always been my concern with the accusations that the federal government tried to hack or penetrate. That isn't what happened. It was a port scan, which is a security check.
Is that not true?
I-
All right,
I
Representative Oliver.
I was also trying to remember, I thought it was this committee, but it was Science and Technology. We had a very involved discussion, what I felt like was pretty confusing in terms of what the Secretary of State's position was. In general, I'm against urging resolutions, just particularly this time. But let me ask you this question. Was the Voting Rights Act of 1965 a federal overreach into state elections?
The Voter Rights Act, as far as I'm concerned, is on the premise of the 14th Amendment. So if it's based on the 14th Amendment, I wouldn't think that would be an overreach. But that's just my opinion.
All right, any other questions, authors of the bill? Anybody want to weigh in from the Secretary of State, or just answer questions if needed?
I can answer any questions if needed by the committee.
Any question, wow, that's impressive.
Any questions related to
Okay. Yeah. What are the 3 lottery numbers? Yeah. All right, what is the desire of the committee then?
Mr. Chairman, I move to pass.
Got a move, do pass.
Second.
Got a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. By substitute, thank you. Thank you so much. Those opposed, like sign. No, thank you.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
regulated industries, they all left us, but the room's yours. Thank you, members.
We're beating up on Donald Trump. That's what we're doing with this resolution.
If I, hey, Jay, if I could see the members in the corner real quick.